Before we jump into this episode, I want to remind you that while Caitlin and Sophia are dietitians, we're not your dietitians. This means the information shared in the Food Freedom Fertility podcast is intended to entertain, educate, and inform. It is not a substitute for medical care. This information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making any changes.
Welcome to an episode of Wins Wednesday of the Food Freedom and Fertility podcast. I'm Caitlin Johnson, one of the co-hosts of this show. If you're new to listening to this show, this is a podcast that myself and a very dear friend of mine started. We're both fertility dietitians, really interested in women's health and changing generations of lives. And this new segment is really meant to provide hope for those of you that are listening, still waiting for pregnancy, still waiting to have babies, that you might see a story that might be similar to yours or that you resonate with, or even just feels like it gives you a little bit of community along the way. So I'd like to introduce Valerie. Valerie is very near and dear to my heart because she was somebody that listened to our podcast and then chose to allow me to be a little part of her journey to building her family, and is being generous enough to come share some of her story with us today. So thanks for being here, Valerie.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. So why don't you just if I were to meet you at a park, fast forward 3 years from now, your little one's playing and going down the slide, and I'm like, hey, Valerie, I'm Caitlin. First of all, where would we meet you? What state do you live in?
I'm currently in Arizona. I'm originally from San Diego and then spent 10 years in Colorado, and we just landed in Arizona a couple months ago.
Okay, so new. So the slide would be hot depending on the time of year in Arizona. Yeah. What would you share with a new friend just about your life, about how old your child is, what you do for a living if you have a living, what's important to you and your husband, Austin? What would be kind of the here's a little bit about me you'd share?
Yeah. So my baby she just turned 1 year old. Her name is Rosalie. We worked really hard to have her. So she's our pride and joy. I'm originally from San Diego, like I had mentioned earlier. My background is in special education, specifically with kiddos who've been through trauma, deal with mental health struggles, behavioral struggles. But I've taken a break from that since I've become a mom. And it's been a really rewarding experience. So I don't know what the future holds, if I'll go back to working or if I'll just continue to embrace this mamahood. I guess we'll see.
Yeah. It's kind of, it's life-changing in every way, isn't it? It's
totally
all the ways you expect typically, and in many ways you don't expect.
Yes. Yeah. I thought I would be an expert because I've spent my entire career working with children from 0 to 18. But no, I had no clue what I was doing, it turns out. And I've learned so much in the last year and even the year prior in pregnancy. So yeah, you may think and you may think you're going to be fantastic. And then boom, you have a baby and everything changes.
I know it is kind of a humbling experience from start to finish. Is there a finish from the start? It's a humbling experience from the start. And I think those of us that have struggled to get pregnant, we've been humbled even earlier than some others along the way. So let's shift a little bit. I kind of want to come back to that maybe towards the end, but sometimes it's easier to kind of tell the stories if we move through them via a timeline. So when you and Austin decided it was time to start getting pregnant, is that where kind of your fertility and maybe questionable PCOS diagnosis came in, or did you receive that diagnosis earlier on?
Now knowing what I know about PCOS, It started really early. I started my period very, very young. I was like 10 years old. And I remember like my mom having to have a conversation with my teacher at the time and say, this is what happened. You know, you have to let her go to the bathroom when she needs to go. And I remember being so embarrassed. And at the time, I didn't really think anything of it. And then like fast forward to high school, I had really, really painful periods. I remember being in class and like nearly fainting from the
Wow.
pain of my periods at the time. And I just thought that was normal because my sister was that way as well. And, you know, my friends could kind of commiserate. And so, um, yeah, I didn't know anything different. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. But looking back now, knowing what I know about PCOS, it all makes a lot of sense. And um, in order to control that, the painful periods, I went to the doctor and they put me on, I wish I remembered the name of the medication, but it was a birth control that only allowed you to have a period 4 times a year. So it was every 3 months. And it was actually a part of this like trial study where they were testing if that particular birth control impacted bone density. And, you know, my mom had just brought me there to get some birth control and they were like, this is a way you can get it for free. And so we were like, okay. And
Mm-hmm.
again, knowing what I know now, it would be a hard no. But
Mm-hmm.
back then it just seemed convenient and I just had to go in for some bone scans and I got this birth control for free that was supposed to make my periods only 4 times a year. And I was like, wow, I don't have to go through this pain except for 4 times a year instead of 12 times a year.
Yeah. What a
So,
solution, frankly,
right,
when it's handed
right.
to you that way.
Yes. And um, so I think my story really starts back there because up until that point, my periods were regular. I wouldn't say that they were um, normal by any means because of the intensity of the pain. And, but again, I didn't know any different. And so I was on that birth control for probably a handful of years. And then when I got into college, I came off of it. And that was just, I don't know, I think more of an intuition thing, thinking like, this doesn't really feel right. Again, at that time, I still didn't really have a ton of knowledge about
Mm-hmm.
my cycle or PCOS or anything, but I came off of it. And the first thing that happened that was really notable for me that led to the PCOS diagnosis was I had a lot of pain and I didn't know what it like. It wasn't necessarily with my periods. It was at random times. And one time it landed me in the ER and they couldn't really find anything. They said, maybe you had a cyst that burst. And again, it was just like not really knowing at the time what was going on. And so I was kind of in and out of doctors and they did do an ultrasound and saw that I had tons of follicles on my ovaries. And that was the first time I had ever even heard of PCOS. So I think, you know, my story does start way back there when I got that PCOS diagnosis. And I didn't, again, think much of it because I wasn't trying to get pregnant. I wasn't, you know, even really paying much attention to my cycle. They were very irregular though after I stopped that birth control and that was normal to me. It would be like 60 days or 90 days. They were just very unpredictable. So when I did finally meet my husband, um, that's when I started to pay more attention because, you know, like you need to have a regular period to get pregnant for the most part. And so that's when I really started to pursue more about looking for answers, trying to talk to doctors about what I could do to make things more regular.
And did they have any solutions for you? Like, was there wisdom or things that they recommended to track on your body or come back and we'll do this test? Like, what was their response to that questioning?
Yeah, they did do some blood work, and I don't remember the specific details, but I do remember some of my blood work was saying, from what I remember, the doctor describing it was, she said, it looks like you're pre-diabetic. And I'm not overweight. I don't eat bad. I've always worked out. Um, and her suggestion to me at that time was eat more protein, which isn't a terrible suggestion. It's just vague. And the other suggestion was birth control, to try to make things regular. And um, I didn't want to go back on birth control, even though we weren't quite trying to get pregnant yet. I just felt like that wasn't the solution. And that's when I really started to dive into, like, I just wanted more answers. And the eat more protein, that was a good suggestion. But again, I was eating a lot of protein. I didn't understand. And there wasn't a lot of clarity along with it. And at the time, to the doctor's benefit, I don't think I really had the right questions to ask either. So I just walked out of that appointment thinking, okay, eat more protein, but I wasn't going to take the other suggestion of get on birth control because that just didn't sit right for me at the time.
Especially if you're either prepping to get pregnant or you're actually right now trying to conceive. It can feel a little bit like, aren't I moving backwards if I prevent pregnancy, right? Like, we're birth control. That's what it's meant to stop, right? And it is interesting. I see in so many women's stories where very often, at least, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 38. And I think that there's a big group of us that kind of came up in the generation where it was like, that was kind of just the solution for any female problem. And it was becoming socially normal and medically common to be on birth control as a teenager, sometimes even a very early teenager. And so there's just so many of us that kind of came through the line on it. And maybe that stopped us from obtaining our diagnosis earlier, or stopped us from finding out that there were ways that we could manage a condition that we had that we didn't know we had earlier, which really robs us of opportunities at a lot of things, lowering risks. One of the reasons why the doctors were looking at this type of a cycle after cycle without a bleed type of birth control and bone density is because progesterone helps control bone density. And if we're not giving you adequate kind of exposure to progesterone over time, that limits your body's ability within a 30-ish day cycle to like redeposit into your bones for the density that you need. And women who are on birth control and recommended to be on birth control for years of their fertile years, like sometimes most of their fertile years, they're not exposed to their natural progesterone production or even like a bioidentical progesterone that could provide similar benefits. And so what I see in a case like this, it's not even like just, okay, well, let's reduce your pain, but in saying yes to this and not being given more information about what you're then saying no to is important. And I think that that's an important piece of learning about informed consent. And to your point just a few minutes ago, like learning what questions to ask. And this is the case if you're offered birth control, Clomid, letrozole, a blood pressure med is like, if I'm saying yes to taking this, what else am I saying no to? If I'm saying yes to taking this, what could be potential benefits and risks and side effects that I might experience? And that doesn't mean you will, but just being informed so that you can consent is a really big piece of the puzzle. And for somebody in their teens, you don't even know enough about life to know to ask those questions, right? And like, our moms probably didn't know any better either. Honestly, I think my doctor prescribed my birth control at 16 without my mom even knowing, which kind of blows my mind. So, there's so much there, and that's not the point of this podcast. But it is an interesting thing that you kind of get robbed of years of optimizing your overall health, not just your fertile health, by being given something that just completely masks an entire condition.
Yeah.
So it is interesting hearing you say, I was always really interested in nourishing my body. I always was somebody that enjoyed exercising or did exercise regularly. And here you are still being told, like, not in these words, but that you have insulin resistance, that you're essentially borderline pre-diabetic or pre-diabetic.
Right.
And me looking at you today, and probably any room you walk into with a doctor, that's not based on just the way that your body looks to me right now, something that would jump off as like a very outward symptom. So I can see that even being kind of surprising to a practitioner. But it does tell a little bit of the inside story, even if it's not expressing as a bunch of excess weight or expressing as a number of these other symptoms. That higher level of insulin that's doing a job within your body is also kind of sending off alarm signals at your ovary, making you produce more testosterone, kind of creating a scenario where polycystic ovaries can be present if it's not treated, and can make your cycle longer, can make it harder to ovulate, can make egg quality lower, can impact so many different things that I'm sure is a little bit of the story. So you kind of get this PCOS diagnosis. You're shifting into, now we're trying to conceive. Like, you're not getting a lot of answers. You're basically being told to eat more protein and maybe go back on birth control. Maybe what she's thinking is to reset things a little bit. That's oftentimes what doctors kind of describe as there's like this in-between period. But what do the next few months or the next few years look like for you guys?
Yeah. So after hearing that diagnosis and just kind of doing a lot of research, I started to pay more attention to my cycles, trying to track the amount of days between bleeds. And I didn't know enough at that time yet to look for signs of ovulation. This is kind of the beginning of my research there. But I remember it was before we got married, but I was starting to look at my cycles deeper, and I was bleeding for like a month at a time. And then I would stop for 2 weeks, and then I would bleed again. And so that landed me back in the doctor trying to find answers. And I just wasn't finding answers from them that were satisfying my questions. And so I just really honed in on my diet. I started listening. That's about the time that I started listening to your podcast and a couple others, and just learning more about PCOS in general. I really started to focus on like eating the rainbow in terms of like vegetables and fruits and foods in general. And looking at like what I truly was eating calorie wise. And I think I wasn't quite giving my body enough, because I've always fought this insulin resistance. I've always fought this, like being like this. I just feel like my body gains weight easily. And so I've always fought that, and fought it by eating too little, probably. And so I just don't think my body was getting enough for my reproductive system to do what it needed to do. And so I started to eat more and more colorful, higher protein, higher fiber. And through doing that, all my blood work looked fine. According to my providers at the time, they were within the normal limits. And I would like look at my numbers, and I would Google charts of like what's normal versus what's optimal, because I was starting to differentiate between the two. And so that was really a time period of me just learning what was going on with my body, and I was trying to compare that with like what the doctors were telling me. And a lot of what I was hearing was when you are married and you're ready to try, we'll likely try medicated cycles or IUI. And it just didn't sit right with me because I'm thinking like, how is that even possible when I'm bleeding for months at a time? And it didn't feel right. And so that's when I was like taking matters into my own hands, really listening to a lot of podcasts, reading a lot, listening to other people's stories. And it was kind of a journey. And I think at the time I was also in a really stressful job where it just the nature of what I did, being with kids with mental health
Absolutely.
struggles, I would be like spit on each day and kicked each day. And I had to quit my job because my stress levels were just too high. And I think that was impacting my cycle and my body as a whole. So that is even before I got pregnant, when I said, like, this is enough, because if my body is reacting this way, even if my mind tells me I should keep going, my body's telling me I need a break. So I think stress management was a huge factor as well. And so I quit my job. I really focused on my diet, and like, praise God that I was in a position where I could quit my job. Not everybody can do that,
Yeah.
and so I recognize that, and I know that can't be everybody's story, but I do think that had a huge impact because I could really focus on my health and getting better. And so shortly after that, we got married, and I remember we went away on our honeymoon, and we were like, okay, we're really going to try to get pregnant now. And I was convinced that I got pregnant like that first try. I came home and I ordered like the What to Expect When You're Expecting book on Amazon. And I read all like the first half of that book, and then my period showed up. And I was like, okay, it's not so easy. And I remember being let down that first time, and little did I know at the time that that was going to be my story for quite a few more cycles, and so I look back at that version of me, and I'm like, wow, like she had so much more to learn still, because and go through before we could finally get our positive test. So that's kind of what that time frame looked like, from getting the diagnosis to like really starting to try.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. One thing that you said, and there's a couple things that I think we should kind of echo and reiterate, or maybe give 2 or 3 sentences to each of these points you made, which were very eloquently stated, is that doctors pulled lab work and told you they were in the normal range. But then you went and looked to see what was the difference between normal and optimal. And I hear this so often where it's like, well, we went to the doctor. They said his semen analysis was normal, or they said my testosterone was normal, or they said that my LH was normal. Honestly, I look at LH levels all day long, and they're very often quote unquote normal, but they're not optimal for the time of cycle that we're looking at, or they're not optimal in relation to another lab. So there's a lot more detail and kind of nuance to lab work than just here's a lab reference range and you fall within normal. And if you've listened to any of our lab episodes, you'll know that even like what is normal, sometimes what we're talking about, if we're talking about nutrients, is normal so that you don't have a deficiency or an illness related to it, or normal related to an entire population, male, female, and just adult. So, understanding what these lab reference ranges are is important. When we set the lab reference range, for instance, for thyroid stimulating hormone, the hormone that comes from your brain to tell your thyroid what to do, we actually looked at a population that had a lot of thyroid disease. And so what is even still considered normal isn't even normal. So you really have to look at the optimal level. So there's a lot of nuance there. One of the other things that I really loved how you phrased it was, when I look back at that version of me, she still had so much to learn. My mind went to like, oh, how naive. And even how I said it wasn't kind or like generous to who she was and who you
Right.
are now. Like there was a lot of learning. There was probably a lot of hardship. There were also triumphs, and just the way you phrased that, it just even restating it gives me a little bit of goosebumps. And I hope that listeners, you hear that there's a lot of grace in how Valerie just said that version of her had a lot to learn still, and maybe you have a lot to learn still, to really support your body into being its most fertile self. One thing that I wanted to ask you about what you just shared is you realized that you probably needed to eat more. And I think that that's a scary prospect for a lot of people. Did you have to do any like mental gymnastics or things to get to the point where you're like, okay, I trust that I need to eat more and I'm going to eat more? Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, um, it's a hard and scary concept to think, oh, I have to eat more when I've always, my whole life, wanted to be skinnier, you know? And so, yeah, it was really hard to grapple with. And I've always focused on healthy meals. I grew up, I mean, as you probably did too, in this culture where like the diet culture really exploded, and my
mhm,
parents dieted and my sisters were dieting and I dieted,
mhm,
and it
mhm.
was like just constant yo-yo dieting, and that's what I was used to. And it was all out of this fear of like gaining weight. And so I had to get past the thought that like gaining weight was going to be like the end of things for me. Maybe I was going to gain weight, but like that was going to be okay because I was going to obtain like the ultimate goal of having not only like my body functioning how it should be in my body and like optimal health, but also potentially getting a baby out of it. And so,
Mhm.
and if you're going to have a baby, you're going to gain weight because you're going to get pregnant and then you're going to gain weight for sure. So, it was kind of, I had to just be okay with that. And it wasn't easy. Like I said, I had a lot to learn about that. And um so there were some days when it was harder than others because I would step on the scale and I would see, oh, I am, gaining weight. I'm eating butter instead of, I don't know,
I can't
margarine or
believe it's not
whatever it was.
butter. Yeah, some version of, yeah.
Right. Right. And I'm eating full fat cheese, and I'm eating cuts of meat that have more fat in them. And my fertility was better for it. But yeah, I did see the scale increase, and it's scary at the time. But all I can say to anybody who's afraid of that is like, you have to trust that you're doing what's best for your body and for your
Mhm.
fertility. And I think I'm the best testament of that because I saw my cycles go from these like wacky bleeding for 30 days and then 90 days without a period down to I was at 37 days cycle when I got pregnant. So even though that's still
Amazing.
not 30 days or 28 days or whatever, that was really good for me. So I saw a
Hmm.
ton of improvement through it. So it is scary, but it was worth it. So
Absolutely. Okay, so let's take a break on that high note, and then we can kind of shift gears into what else did it really take? What else did that version of Valerie need to learn, to get Rosalie? So we'll take a break here. One thing that I love about Caraway is cooking for my children. And we're releasing this episode right before Mother's Day. I know many of you listening to this are still in this, I'm hoping to become a mother. But if you want cookware that's going to transition seamlessly from I'm trying to get pregnant to now I'm cooking for sweet little humans that I want to have non toxic cookware, and I also want it to really incorporate into my everyday life, Caraway has you covered. I made cookies last week with my little ones. I was trying out a new recipe, high protein chocolate chip cookies, double chocolate. And I was like, usually I cook on parchment paper so that I don't have to scrub a pan. And usually even though it says you don't need to spray something, I'll rub my pan with a little butter just so I don't have to do a lot of cleanup. Guys, you can skip that step with Caraway. We made these cookies. They came off the pan as if I had slathered it in butter, but there was no butter on that pan. And these cookies were delicious. They held their form. I'm so glad that I have this memory of making cookies with my daughters, trying out a recipe, and their sweet little hands being able to pull that cookie off without any trouble.
And just as a reminder, their iconic cookware set comes with the saute pan, the fry pan, Dutch oven, saucepan, lids for everything, a canvas lid holder, and a magnetic pan rack for storage. It is the ultimate kitchen setup, and it will save you $150 versus buying the items individually. Plus, if you visit carawayhome.com/FFF10, you can take an additional 10% off your purchase. This deal is exclusive for our listeners, so go to carawayhome.com/FFF10 or use code FFF10 at checkout. Caraway, non-toxic cookware made modern.
And we're back. Okay, Valerie, before we hop into what happened next, I do want to ask the question because I think this idea of diet culture and the skinniest body is the most beautiful body is something somehow in our generation we need to just punch out, especially because you have a Rosalie and I have a Bonnie and Fiona and Sophia has a Natalie and Jenny. Like, I want my children growing up. I watched this article or this ad today, and it asked all these like adult people. A friend of mine shared this on Instagram. Like, what does it look like when a girl runs? And like how these girls ran and these men imitating women run was like as if we had high heels on and as if we were like prissy and their arms were like, if you're on YouTube watching us. And then it asked, how do girls fight? And it was kind of like this like flapping of the hands. And then they asked like little 7-year-old and 10-year-olds, what's it look like when a girl runs? And they ran and they looked like they were in the Olympics. And then they asked them, what does it look like when a girl fights? And they had like these really good like Muhammad Ali type punches and like the cultural indoctrination that they had to be pretty, that they had to fight catty, that they, like these little girls didn't know that yet. And praise God, I hope they never see that ad for what it is in real life. But there is this view of beauty. There's this view of women that frankly we aren't strong and that we shouldn't be. And that we should be skinny rails and that that's what's most appealing. And so there's a lot of fear for women that may need to gain a little bit of weight to be their most fertile self, or maybe not even weight, but just nourish themselves and change their body composition around a little bit. And that can feel really scary. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, like, how did Austin feel about this? How did your new husband who loved you and decided to marry you and say in sickness and in health, I'm going to love you? Like, what did he think of you eating a little bit more and how your body might have changed?
I mean, he was always on board. He never criticized or had anything negative to say. And actually, one piece that I had left out earlier was when I was having these really long cycles and then absent cycles, one doctor had suggested hypothalamic amenorrhea and thought that maybe I wasn't eating enough. And that was part of it. And when I told my husband that, his initial reaction was, what do you mean? Like, you eat plenty, which, on the outside, I did. I ate like square meals a day and snacks, but I just don't think that they consisted of like enough density, So anyway, so I did hear that initial pushback from him of like, what do you mean? Like, he just was very skeptical of that doctor saying that I didn't eat enough. And of course that brought up feelings in myself of like, well, maybe I shouldn't eat more, and that wasn't him putting that on me. That was just him being skeptical and then my reaction to that. So I do want to distinguish between the two. He never implied that I shouldn't eat more or shouldn't try that. And I think, having that supportive person through that process of that potentially scary weight gain, and changing my diet, making it look different. I mean, that's really important. You have to have that person that's there and that shows you support the whole time, because it's intimidating. But he was never negative about it. And I love cooking, and I love cooking for him. And so he's always just on board for whatever I make.
Whatever
so I
meals
love
come
my
in.
meals,
Yeah.
and it worked out for him. So
You're a kindred spirit on this podcast. Sophia and I just love cooking. And like I tell people all the time, there's this mom who's in my daughter's kindergarten class. She just had twins, and she's like, I don't think I'm going to send the meal train out to this group. We have enough people. I was like, love language, food over here. Food is my love language. Like, it's at least how I communicate my love to people. Please let me bring you, like, if you don't let me bring you and tell me what you like and what you're allergic to, it's coming anyway. Let me just.
I'll send you something.
Yeah, I have a similar husband in that, like, he just loves to eat, and so he's game for whatever the meal is coming.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that. So you have some cycle improvements. You have a little bit of, is it PCOS? Is it hypothalamic amenorrhea? I love that the conversation has gone here a little bit, because I think people think they're mutually exclusive, that you can't have them both, and you can. And I actually see it fairly commonly because of how many diets PCOS women go on to try to manage their symptoms, and sometimes are undernourishing for fertility. And it may not be a calorie thing. It may be a nourishment thing. Your body may not have the true vitamins and minerals and nourishment to grow a healthy baby and protect very, highly sensitive genetic material from damage, to have, not just a baby, but a really healthy baby that has all the chromosomes they need, that have been protected and cared for. So, what does that shift kind of into the next phase of the story look like?
Yeah, so we tried for a handful of cycles. I did see my cycles start to shorten, as I had mentioned before, going from 60 days. Then I had a handful of them in the 40-day range. And I was using my temp drop to track ovulation and try to nail that ovulation day. And we just had a lot of misses in that time. No positive pregnancy tests. And then one time I had like a faint positive, and then it was gone. So I don't know if it was a chemical or a fluke or what happened there. And we just kept trying without success. And at this point, I had listened to every one of your guys' podcasts, looked at all of your posts. I'd done so much change in, my diet and my exercise and my stress management and my sleep. And I was feeling like, what else can I possibly do? I felt like I was doing all of the things. And that's when I reached out to you. And I remember saying a lot of those things to you, just saying like, I feel like I'm doing all the things right. And I've considered joining this program, but like, is it going to really give me, what else can I do? I'm following all the guidelines, and I was skeptical that there could be more that I could do. Again, just I had a lot more to learn, and I didn't even know it. And so I finally, I talked it over with Austin, and I finally decided I'm just going to join this program and see where it gets me. Because I remember you saying like, a lot of times this is the final push that women need to just get them over that last hump. And that truly was what it was, because I joined the program and just dove into all of the information. I know it's like spaced out by weeks, but I was just like,
yeah, most people binge it. Yeah.
and I was in a position where I could, so I blew through it all. And I started being really consistent with my supplements. I was taking myo-inositol, fish oil, prenatal, obviously, and I think I did take NAC as well there at the end. And
Were
yeah,
any
it
of
feels kind of
those
unbalanced.
different from what you had been doing before taking the course, or was that something that we kind of decided on together?
We had decided on those things together. I was taking a prenatal, but not a super high quality one, so I switched to the needed
Mm-hmm.
prenatal. And I added in NAC after talking to you, and then I was just more consistent with my minoxidil. I
Mm-hmm.
was already taking that prior, but um, just I was taking it morning and night instead of just here and there like I was before. And the other thing was you had given me some guidance on increasing my fiber in my diet. And I think I was even increasing my protein even further than what I had already been doing because I did track my eating for like a week. And
Mm-hmm.
then you had analyzed it and given me that feedback. So those were a couple more changes that I was looking at, and then I decreased my sugar as much as I could, or if I mean, I still did do some sugar here and there. I'm
You
not
got to
gonna
live
lie, but
life. Yeah.
I just learned how to eat it better. I paired it with protein and fats,
Uh-huh.
and that I think had a huge impact too on my um, blood sugar management. And I'll also say the other thing was, and I think this came from either your podcast or your course, was like this mentality of adding things into my diet versus taking things out. And so
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking, okay, I'm adding in more vegetables, I'm adding in more fiber, I'm adding in more protein. I'm not taking anything out. There's nothing I can't
Mm-hmm.
have.
Mm-hmm.
And it's instead of that mindset, it was more
Like
I'm
being
adding in. And then
restrictive.
there's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and then there's just not as much room for other things because I'm getting all those in. So
Right.
I think that mindset was really helpful.
Do you have like thoughts about, since you do enjoy cooking, thoughts about like what made it easier for you to incorporate some of those adding in more fiber, like more in like a practical thing, like this is one way I added in more fiber, or I had to kind of learn to eat my yada yada a little differently so that just to give people kind of like a concrete this one particular thing kind of helped me.
Yeah, I think adding in a vegetable into my breakfast was something I never really did before. My breakfasts were always more sweet than savory. And so
Mm-hmm.
making that mental switch was really helpful. Like I could just toss some spinach in with my eggs, or I would just do like a bell pepper on the side. A lot of these ideas are
Mm-hmm.
from you. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm repeating what you've told me, but those are all things that I found really easy and feasible. And then just like adding an avocado to get that extra fiber. Um, I think there's a lot of ways to like mask vegetables in your meals.
Mm-hmm.
Making my pasta sauce out of all sorts of veggies and just blending
Mm-hmm.
them all up together, things like that. Um, were were just like easy, tangible switches. I also did like chickpea pasta instead of regular pasta,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And then like putting spinach as the base of my pasta and then a little bit of pasta on top, with
Mm-hmm.
my protein. And so there were a lot of little tricks like that that made it easier.
Mm-hmm. Did you guys find learning a little bit more, like you went from tracking bleed to bleed? Did you do any more tracking, more of like cervical mucus or basal body temping, or did you have to get that granular?
Yeah, yeah. I was tracking my body temperature. I used Temp Drop, which
Mm-hmm.
100% recommend to anybody because it was just like I didn't have to think about it.
Yeah.
I just strapped that on my arm, and that really helped me to nail down ovulation, especially when my cycles were so long. It was hard to anticipate when it was going to be. And even still, I know, your temporizes after ovulation, but it still helped to give me a window to
Mm-hmm.
predict for the following cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely looked at cervical mucus, and a lot of times that was really hard for me to decipher because I think my body would like rev up like it was going to ovulate.
Mm-hmm.
So I would see like what I thought was fertile cervical mucus, and then
It would
it
go
would not
away and
ovulate.
kind of come
And
back.
then it would start again. So that was I just never knew what I was looking at. And then I definitely toward the end was trying to feel where my cervix was. And again, I just never really quite figured it out. I would always try, but my basal body temperature was the more helpful thing because it was
Mm-hmm.
just concrete. I was like, okay, here's my temperature. I can watch it rise. So that
Mm-hmm.
was the most helpful thing for me.
So when you got your cycle down 37-ish days, did you have a few cycles in a row where you were like, oh, I'm ovulating around day 25 or I'm ovulating around day 23 for a couple cycles? And then it was like, okay, this is where we really need to concentrate intimacy.
Yeah, definitely. So I was hovering around like the 40-day cycles. So I knew 14 days ish prior to that I would ovulate, and that's when we would really try to time intercourse. And there were still a few cycles in there. I'd say probably 3 cycles from when I joined your program to when we got our positive. And that we still didn't get a positive. So I was feeling somewhat discouraged, but it was on a cycle that would have been 37 days, just based on my ovulation, that we did get a positive. And of course, I was testing so early because I couldn't help myself. So I would start testing at like 8 DPO, and I was not getting any positives. And then come 11 DPO of that 37-day cycle, I got like the most faint positive that you could possibly get. I mean, it didn't even pick up on my phone camera when I tried to take a picture of it. And I was just in so much shock and denial that I was like, this can't possibly be real. So I was like testing in the morning, testing in the afternoon, testing at night, testing. And I wish I could go back and tell that me, like, take a deep breath, because I was so anxious when I got that positive that I don't think that I was able to like be excited, because I felt like I was like grasping onto something that like I'd never been able to grasp onto before,
And what
and
if it
I
just
didn't want to
slips through
slip
my
away.
fingers? Yeah.
Yes. And so I was so nervous. And I remember reaching out to you and saying, like, I have this really, really faint positive, and I'm worried it's going to be a chemical. And that's when you had suggested getting some blood work done. And I remember getting that back just a couple days later, and my HCG was a 12. And I was like, wow, that doesn't bode well for me, like that's low. And my progesterone was on the lower side as well. And I just thought, I mean, I was an anxious mess because I just thought it's going to slip away. This thing that I've like worked so hard for the past almost year, like it's going to slip away. But I just kept testing and testing. And I like my tests didn't seem a whole lot darker each day. And I remember overanalyzing that. And man, it was a hard few days. It should have been joyful, but it was a hard full 4 or 5 days until I finally saw like this very positive test. And I got in with the doctor, and they tested my HCG, and it was doubling, and it was doing what it was supposed to do. And even at that time, I just remember being so anxious because like I couldn't see it coming to fruition. I couldn't see it being positive for as long as it needed to be positive. So it was a
It
really
is,
hard time, even though it
it's
should have
an,
been really joyful.
yeah. And I'm sure there was some joy, right? But you're like, it's mixed with so much what ifs. And it's the what
Yeah.
ifs that kind of like become that consuming little mouse running in the wheel in your head. And, for somebody who just thinks about sex and seems to get pregnant and they have a baby at like 22, it's like you feel like you're just a completely different species than that person because,
Totally.
it's like you weren't even looking to see if you were pregnant, and your period's a month late and now and then here I am, like, we had sex, then I saw ovulation and I started testing, and like, here we are, we're off to the races. And
Yeah.
as many times as you can tell someone, don't test like that. Don't look for the darker lines. Don't do that. It's like, yeah, it's like telling a 2-year-old, don't eat the sugar in front of you. Like, you're human. You want proof that you're still pregnant. And what I will say is that your level of hydration impacts how dark the line is. The time of day can impact how dark the line is. So if you are somebody that wants to test more often than most, at least test once a day and in the morning when you wake up first thing, because you will literally put yourself through like mental gymnastics throughout the day. And truly, that is not good for your health and for your baby. Like, it's really not. And you know that now. And thankfully, this turned out well for you. For some others, they've done the same gymnastics and then ended in loss and then ended in another loss. And so they are looking for the proof that it's different. But one thing that I can say is that second test later in the day is going to bring you more pain than reassurance. It just will.
Yeah.
And especially if we are still days post-ovulation and not days from missed period.
Yes.
The tests are very questionable, especially if you are peeing on the little dipstick ones that you buy by the like 100-full on Amazon. They're not the same as like the clear blue that's telling you how many weeks pregnant they think you are. They're just not the same.
Right.
And Valerie and I can laugh and smile about this now. And we have thoughts for that Valerie and that Caitlin then. And hopefully maybe someone will hear this and go, okay, I'm not going to do that to myself. Maybe there will be someone. It may not be the masses, but someone will hear this and go, I'm going to listen, and I'll at least wait till tomorrow to retest. But so the numbers started increasing. The doctors saw the doubling. When did the anxiety drop? Or was it just there?
I got on a oral progesterone, and seeing the numbers, I think she drew my blood. I had the blood draw with you and then 2 blood draws with the doctor. After that 3rd blood draw, my anxiety started to drop. And getting on the progesterone, I felt like that was something else that gave me that peace of mind, because my progesterone was on the lower side. And so I think that's about when it started to drop. I think it did stick with me throughout the pregnancy, but just not to that extreme. And I think that just comes with the battle to get pregnant. And like, the more you know, the more you have the potential to worry. If I was blissfully ignorant, I probably wouldn't have been as anxious throughout my pregnancy. But I had like immersed myself in all of these infertility stories, and I'm glad I did, because I learned so much, but also I learned too much because then I was nervous, but I would say it definitely started to be almost a thing of the past around my 2nd trimester. I was really, really sick for the first like 20 weeks. And I was so sick that I was less worried. I was too busy being sick.
I understand that. And there is a security that comes with the sickness, because you're still pregnant, right? Like, you're nauseous and you're puking. You're like, it's because of this thing that's growing inside me. I have this like just amoeba thing making me sick.
Yes.
I will also say that progesterone can decrease anxiety. So taking the progesterone was something productive and may have even had like not a placebo effect, but you know what I mean? Like, I know that I'm covering this thing that was a concern. but
Yes.
it also can help lower anxiety, which is one of the reasons, harken back to the beginning of this episode, that we're talking like you want your body exposed to natural progesterone so you have bone density. You also want it so that you can calm and chill out. And it's also one of the reasons why after you do ovulate in a cycle, you may feel more tired. That's also the progesterone. So there are things that it's doing hormonally within your body that are also helping this kind of like rest and ease. Um, but your story is kind of interesting. It sounds like the few shifts that you made once we kind of individualized things a little bit more for you, you saw it scoot ovulation up a little bit earlier. You never know because it's really hard to test something like quote unquote egg quality without removing eggs from your body and frankly inseminating them. Like you can't really assess egg quality even just after you remove eggs. It really takes insemination to reflect egg quality. But there was probably some improvement there, I would think, as well, in just being more consistent with the inositol, maybe adding in the NAC,
Mhm.
maybe having the higher quality prenatal and a methylated B vitamin also did something that your body genetically may have needed a little extra support in. We'll never know, but
Right.
we do know that things improved to some degree and pregnancy did happen, which is so wonderful. And now you have little Rosalie.
Yes.
What was the rest of pregnancy life? Is there anything else about that story that you want to share and kind of have on record or encourage people with, or
No, I mean, I guess just if you are still feeling that anxiety, I mean, it's so hard in the moment, but um, I mean, it can end well. There is the possibility that it will end well, and it's hard to focus on that in the moment, but um, it ended well for me. So, I mean, I'm just very, very, very thankful for that.
amen. Is there a piece of the journey that you'll really take with you if you guys decide you want to have any more children and you start trying for that? Are there pieces that you're like, okay, this time I won't test like that, or this time I'll do this differently?
Yeah, I think so. I've noticed that my cycle has been fairly regular since having Rosalie, and so I think, I'm still going to implement all of the things that I did in terms of my diet and my supplements and make sure that I'm doing everything that I know is best for my fertility and my body. And I'm already starting to focus on those things a little bit. I'm still breastfeeding, but I'm trying to kind of get in the groove for
Mm-hmm.
when we do that. But yeah, the testing, man, I think I'd like to say that I won't obsessively test come our next pregnancy or our next time trying because yeah, looking back, I'm like, wow, there was just so much anxiety. And now I'm like, Rosalie was like perfectly timed. Um, I mean, if I would have had her when we first started trying, wow, it would have been so much harder because there was so much that my husband and I were still figuring out where we wanted to live, what we wanted to do. I just, even though I still would have been so happy to have her then, I think she came at the perfect time in our lives. So I think also just carrying that mantra forward is like, I know number two will come when he or
When
she is
he or
supposed
she,
to.
and I often say this, the right sperm and the right egg. Like sometimes you're like, well, why not this cycle? And if you can just tell your body, I understand it wasn't the right egg, and maybe
Right,
next month it will be,
right.
and um, wow, you've overcome so much. And is there anything about your time with Rosalie over this last year or things that you were surprised didn't come naturally or that did come really naturally about motherhood or about having a
Yeah.
baby?
Um, yeah, I did want to share a little bit about birth, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
sure.
Because my story was kind of weird. I had my water broke At 39 weeks, it started to leak. And I wasn't really sure what was going on at the time, or wasn't even sure that it was leaking. And I had done a lot of research about wanting to have a natural birth, and just wanted to avoid like the whole cascade of interventions in the hospital. I was having a hospital birth, but was pretty dead set on having a natural birth. And when my water started to leak, I was like, oh no, like this might be the end of that, because I know if my water's broken, they're going to want me in 24 hours, and they might induce me, and maybe I'll end up with a C-section. I was just very worried about that. And so I decided to just wait it out and see if my body would go into labor on its own. And because my water was broken, but no labor, and 24 hours had passed, and then 36 hours had passed, and I was monitoring for any sign of infection. And, I was doing all the things that I could do to try to induce labor. And then 72 hours had passed, and I was starting to get super nervous about that. And I told my husband, this was on a Sunday when we were hitting like the 72-hour mark. I had an appointment on Monday, was going to be my 39-week appointment. And I told him, okay, well, I know they're probably going to send me to the hospital, to induce me if they see that my water's broken. But then that night, right before my appointment, my labor kicked in at like 3:30 a.m. and Rosie was born at 6:50. So my first labor was like 3 hours.
Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah.
How was
It was
that?
crazy. It was
Was
crazy. It was
intense?
super intense. It was not what I had planned for, not what I had researched or read or anything.
Mm-hmm.
I thought like I was going to watch my contractions slowly progress, and I was going to be able to like adjust my mindset each time. And, and then all of a sudden I was in labor and my contractions were right on top of each other. And I remember calling the
Basically,
hospital.
transition. You're like, labor started.
I,
Actually, I'm in transition.
I was in transition, and I remember I had Austin call the hospital, and they said, okay, well, if her labor just started, try to stay home for another hour or two. So I like got in the tub, and it eventually got to the point where I was probably 8 centimeters dilated at home, 30 minutes away from the hospital. And I looked at my husband, and I was like, we gotta go. Like, I'm pretty sure we gotta go. And so, yeah,
Man, you might have had that baby faster if you hadn't had to travel and your body was just like doing its
I
thing.
I know, because I remember like laying on my bathroom floor, like trying to get like cool from the tile, and just thinking like I'm in transition right now. And I wish I would have been like a little bit, you're in like this your own like world. But if I
Mm-hmm.
would have been like a little bit more aware, I might have like actually, I probably could have felt her head, I'm guessing. And so by the time I got to the hospital, it was like time to push. And so I barely made it, but I made it. um, yeah. And so I just, I think the biggest lesson I learned, not only from infertility to then pregnancy to birth, is like, just like to trust your body. There's so much like intervention for infertility, and so much intervention for pregnancy, and so much intervention for birth. But like your body can do it. Like your body knows, if you can give your body what it needs, it will do what it needs to do. And like that was just like the overarching theme of all of that: infertility, pregnancy, birth. And even now in motherhood, to your original question, it's like things may not come supernatural in the moment, but like your body does know what to do, and your baby knows what to do. And it's just like a process of like learning to trust, I think. So that was a huge thing for me, because I love control. I love being in control.
Yeah.
And so like all of that was a lesson in I'm not in control. Like my body is doing what it's doing. So
Yes, totally. I mean, that is a humbling process in and of itself. And I think that birth is truly transition to like this new state of I'm not completely in control. Like that was a huge piece of my experience with my first, was like I thought birth was natural. I just thought breastfeeding would be natural. I'd put her to my boob and it would work. Like we had such a hard time, and it didn't just happen like that. And but I also really relate to your birth, where it's like fast and furious, and people say they really want that, but they don't know what fast and furious feels like. It does make me wonder, though, in this rupture of membranes kind of lead up, I wonder if you were having some contractions that you just didn't even know were contractions, like that low back pain that kind of feels sort of like cramps of yesteryear with a period you don't even really remember having for so many months. And like, was your body doing this gentle work for you until it was like, okay, and now here we are and we're doing this thing?
Yeah, and I think it must have been. And my appointment prior, the 38 week, I had declined them a cervical check, so I didn't know if I was dilated, or I didn't know what was going on down there. I wasn't ready to know. And so but I think probably if I would have been checked, I might have been dilated and things might have been progressing. And yeah, I mean, I had like lower back pain throughout my whole pregnancy. I saw like a chiropractor and things. And so if I did have lower back pain in that time, it probably didn't faze me because, I was kind of used to it at that point. So yeah, I think my body was for sure doing
Just
things
ready.
behind the scenes. Yeah.
And what was Rosalie's length and weight, and what'd she come out as her little ripe 39 weeker?
Yeah, she was 6 pounds, 6 ounces, and 19 inches.
Just a sweet little peanut.
Yeah,
Not too big,
little
not too
peanut.
small, just
No,
a little peanut.
yeah, little tiny peanut. Yeah, and we did breastfeed. We're still breastfeeding. It's been a journey with that. We've had to be dairy, soy, egg, and tree nut free, and
Oh my gosh.
it's just got all these different allergies that we're navigating and intolerances that we're navigating. So it's been difficult, but all been very worth it.
Absolutely. Because you would do anything for that little one.
Yeah, that's
That
true.
mama bear instinct comes in.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank you for being so generous with your time, generous with your story. Please thank Austin on the podcast, my behalf, our listeners' behalf, for being willing to kind of let our world meet your world a little bit, and painting a picture of hope. I'm really excited for this episode to reach people, especially with PCOS, that may question if they're under eating, even though they may feel like they have weight to lose or weight to gain. This question or idea of like, is it PCOS or hypothalamic amenorrhea, or could there be an overlap? And sometimes you don't need to know all the things to know what you should be doing. And I often find that with women that I work with is a lot of times I'm just giving them permission for the thing they know they need to do. It's like, well, I really feel like I should be doing yada yada. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds right. You probably really should be. Why aren't you? And how do we help you do it? Not why aren't you like, belittling, but like, what obstacles stand in your way? One that I hear quite often is one that resonated with you a little bit, of switching to maybe a more savory breakfast instead of a sweet breakfast. And that can set the stage for your entire day, just being different. And so this is really beautiful. I'm really thankful and excited to follow your story whenever you guys feel like it's the right time to try again. Throw another battery in that temp drop if you're not using it yet.
Yeah,
Again.
not yet, but I need to.
They're really nice postpartum because, it kind of eliminates that wake up at the same time, or if you're getting up to breastfeed or just tend to a baby at night, that consistent sleep that impacts the basal body temperature, you remove that variable, which is honestly, in my opinion, worth the cost of the device. So,
Totally.
yeah. Well, is there anything else about your sweet little one, your family, your story that you want to share with everyone before we sign off? A message of hope or just anything I didn't think to ask you about?
I don't think so, but I'm just very thankful that you're doing this and getting more stories out because I mean that's what I thrived on when I was trying to get pregnant is other people's stories of success. So I'm just thankful to have the opportunity to share.
Yeah, thank you. Did you listen to birth stories when you were pregnant? Did you
Yes,
like that? Yeah.
yes. I listened to, I think it was the birth hour,
Mm-hmm.
and I listened to all sorts. I listened to C-sections, epidural,
Mm,
natural. Even though I had intentions of a natural birth, I wanted to be prepared for whatever
kind of
may
all of
come.
it.
So that was really
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you again for your time, listeners. I hope you enjoy this new segment. We'll be back next time with the story of one of Sophia's clients or course participants. And if you're listening to this, whether you worked with us or not, but you have a fertility story that you want to share, just email us hello@foodfreedomfertility. We'll send you a little link. It helps us gather information like when you can record and tell us a little bit about your story. And hopefully we can get you scheduled to inspire people too. Have a great day.
Hey, it's Sophia. If you love the show and want to continue your health and fertility journey using our resources, head on over to foodfreedomfertility.com for show notes, links to products and services, information about our guests, and our newsletter. Again, that's foodfreedomfertility.com. Thanks for listening.